welcome to episode 27 of my POA podcast, Black Hand and Beyond. I'm Kent Rourke. Thanks for joining us tonight. We have a great topic tonight, one that's been a while coming along here. It's a big topic. It's one of the huge farms and great programs in POA history, and they bred POAs for a long time, and that's the Howard Victor family of Indianola, Iowa. So we're going to talk about their family a little bit and all the POAs that they registered. Not all of them, of course, but a lot of them. We have 100 and some photos to go through tonight. I'm missing some very important photos, but we have a lot of photos, some that haven't been seen much, some maybe never seen. Becky Victor Baker broke out the photo albums for me and sent me quite a few pictures. And some people that showed the High Views POAs sent me some pictures. And then, of course, I got some out of the magazines and catalogs. So, again, we got a great show, a lot of history to cover. This is one of the great programs in POA history, as I mentioned. We're going to get some pictures going here. Here's a picture of their farm. And I'm going to let everybody kind of join here as I start talking about these pictures. I started on time pretty quick tonight, so you never know. Of course, I'm working right up to I go on air. I just sold a vehicle about a half an hour ago, a dually Ram pickup. So you never know when these shows are going to quite get on air. And today is the last day of the month, so I took a chance doing that. But I like to do it on Tuesday. Now remember, we do have a special episode Friday this week, so don't forget to watch that live. Brian Nolan and Jan Jones Nolan are going to come over, make the trek over to Enid, and they're going to be in studio guests, so I'm very excited about that. We're going to talk about her parents' program and her program, the Caddos POAs, another great POA program. So that'll be Friday, special episode. It's on a different night because they're actually going to be here live in person, so it was hard to do it on a Tuesday. And then we do have a couple more episodes this year, going to be in December. And that'll mark 30 episodes for our first year doing this. We started in March, so I think that's pretty good for the first year of this podcast. All the farm is gone except the barn and the arena now. That's sad. I got pictures I didn't show tonight, but there was actually pictures in the magazine of the barn being built and stuff they put in, and I seen some in the scrapbooks too, that huge arena that they built, the red one with the white top. So I know that was a source of pride for the Victors, for Howard especially. So we're going to start looking at some other pictures here. So there was Howard Victor. He was kind of a no-nonsense man. I was a little too young to ever get to know him too well. I've seen him a few times at some POA shows and sales, but unfortunately Howard passed away in 1990. He was in August of 90. He was 61 years old, so he left this world much too young, but he sure made an impact on the world. He was a business owner in Des Moines. He had a gas station, and of course he had that pretty large farm there for a horse ranch, and they raised Appaloosas and POAs, and they started out with Welsh is really what they started, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. But I want to show a little bit of the family. So here's a picture of Howard again, taken in Vegas. You've seen some pictures of their POAs taken in Vegas, I believe on the way to the International. The Victor family went to the 70 International and the 77 International when they went to California. That's where the show was. This is a picture here with Keith Stone, of course another great Iowa breeder, the Goldenrods POAs. Here's a picture of Wanda in front of the same sign, and then Bonnie Stone, and I believe one of Bonnie's daughters. But I wanted to give Wanda some time on here too. You know, Wanda kept on breeding years after she was a widow, and we're going to show some of the Plaudits POAs she raised, and she kept Crusader and quite a few mares. Her herd was a little smaller than when they were in their prime breeding. At one point, the Victors had over 100 horses for years, and they had I think probably 50, 60 brood mares, maybe more than that. If Becky's watching tonight, she probably can say, but according to the POA magazine and Family Highlights and Spotlights and stuff, they said they had over 60 head of POAs and over 100 head of horses on the place. I know they had a lot of Appaloosas on the place too that they used. So here is one of the spotlights that appeared in the magazine. And this shows 4 of the 5 Victor children. So you had Letitia, she's not pictured here, she's the oldest, and then Howard Jr., and then Dan, and then Becky and Jill. And here's a little closer. Danny's riding Chief Pokey. Becky's on Highview's Miss Coco Kelly, which we'll see a lot of pictures of her later. She did a lot of winning on her. And then, of course, there's young Jill on Quo Vadis, who was their stallion for a while, a home-raised stallion, and he's pretty young there. That actually was lead line. Back then, you could use stallions in lead line. So here's another, just like a lot of places, you know, programs, you use some other POAs before you get your own POAs. So here's Miami Mischief and Dan, and then that's Tiny Oswego at the 73 International with Jill. So eventually a lot of the Victor kids ended up riding Highview's POAs. But as you see, like I say, a lot of programs, you have to start out and get some other ones. But they were already raising POAs for a while when they had these in the 70s. So it's kind of a cool story how the Victors got involved in POAs, and it became kind of a trademark of their program, the way they bred POAs. And that was, had some Welsh ponies, and they decided to raise some nice registered Welshes. So they got some more mares, and I believe more than one of the mares was bred to an Appaloosa stallion, whose name was H.W. Oichi Chief. I remember when I was a kid, I thought H.W. stood for Howard and Wanda, but it didn't. It stood for another breeder that had him, and he happened to be a registered Appaloosa before Victor's ended up buying him later, and he was POA size, even in the 54-inch limit. So one of those registered Welsh mares had this baby here, and this became the Victor's first POA, and they named her Pokey. And of course, Pokey became a huge part of their program, which is almost unheard of, that the very first POA you have on your place becomes one of the cornerstones, and all the way up into the 80s and 90s, this mare's bloodline played a part in their POA program. So this is a cool picture of her here. This picture is used quite a bit, and but here's a picture I'd never seen before, thanks to the family photos. That's Howard Jr. there. Apologize for his shirt off there, but he's a young man. So this is in this picture, that's a picture of Pokey and one of her babies, and I just thought the colored photo was just great, and that's why I included in this. And Becky said a lot of the photos were taken in front of the house there and in their yard. So this is one of them that they had. And again, I just think this is a cool photo here, especially in color. And this would have been in the 60s, I'm pretty sure, late 60s. And here she is riding. This is Pokey. So Pokey's sire, well, like I said, was H.W. Oichi Chief, and they were so happy with some of the foals they got out of the Welsh mares, the Victors were, that they ended up buying him. And he was from some old Appaloosa breeding, but he was a short Appaloosa, like I say, so short that they hard shipped him. It says here sired over 135 registered POAs, and that's at the time of this ad. And he did make a huge impact on their program, especially when crossed to those. But then they ended up breeding him, of course, the registered POA mares and different mares like that. So this would be a good part of the episode to just say the one thing that the Victors did really well is they bred for an Appaloosa pony. They literally took an Appaloosa stallion and bred him to Welsh mares. That's how they got their start. So they bred an Appaloosa horse to pony mares to create a POA. They created their own POAs basically at first. Then of course they got in some other bloodlines and POA bloodlines, and they made their own bloodlines that they used and crossed onto other POAs. But at first they basically created their own line. And that's what's so cool about this. And then, of course, they had a lasting impact. They raised POAs for a long time. So So this is another one of Oichi Chief's foals. This was Chief's Poke, and Becky was telling me about how the pedigree kind of got, the registration got screwed up with the name Pokey or whatever, so they named it, they were calling it Shishi. But again, this is one of the crosses of a pony mare to Oichi Chief. Now this is a get a sire for Oichi Chief. This would have been in California at the 1970 International Show. And that's Howard up in front with the dark glasses, and that's a stallion we're going to talk a lot about. That's one of their first home-raised stallions. That's an Oichi Chief son out of a registered Welsh mare, and that's High View's Quo Vadis. And then Pokey's in the middle. You can tell when it's not a colored photo. I wish this photo was colored because those two are beautifully marked POAs. And then that's the one we just seen, Chief Pokey or whatever. That's the third one there. So they were all out of pony mares, registered Welsh mares. Some of them might not have been registered. A couple of them were. And then that same stallion, H.W. Oichi Chief. So that's a pretty good get a sire for 1970. One of the few times my mom showed, she said, so yeah, she's in there. That must be her in the back showing. So Howard was kind of the showman. You know, he was, like I said before, a no-nonsense guy, but he was kind of a flashy showman. He wore some flashy boots, and he liked to wear turquoise and stuff like that. So he was a good showman. He won a lot of titles, as we're about to see in this episode. And you can't get much flashier than this, standing in front of the Stardust sign in Las Vegas, Nevada, holding one of the loudest colored POAs at the time. Again, this is Quo Vadis. So, and he was reserve grand champion at the California show in 1970 at the International show. Siri Rex was grand, and this guy, as a 2-year-old, was reserve grand. High View's Quo Vadis. And he sired a lot of color too for not looking like a color producer. And I don't know what his record was, but when he did throw color, he threw loud color. There he is again in California. You can kind of tell that when you break down the pedigree, that was a small Appaloosa sire and a Welsh mother. You know, you can kind of tell that when you look at it. But for 1970, he was a good-looking POA, and of course, loud colored. So here's the story they wrote about him when he was on the cover. He was on a sales catalog cover as well before they started putting the grands. He was one of the last ones. I think there was a couple before him that wasn't grand on the sales cover, but he was on the cover in 1970. And they're talking, look at that show record as a yearling. First place, 41 out of 47 shows, and he was second all the other shows. So he was either first or second all 47 times. That's a lot of shows as a yearling. So then as a 2-year-old, they showed him pretty heavy too. And when you're that loud colored, of course, you got to be wrapped up. And he was an Iowa horse, so you notice the hood, the winter hood there. I laughed when I seen that picture. And of course, his name's stitched on the side there, High View's Quo Vadis. Jackie Guthrie says, I remember Howard's white boots and all the turquoise jewelry he wore when he showed. He was unforgettable. He sure was, and that's why we're talking about him all these years later. You know, this picture was probably taken about 1970, so that was 51 years ago. Pretty unbelievable. So here he is on the cover. That was probably the cover story we read for this one here. That would have been in May of 71. He'd already appeared on the cover of the sales catalog the year before. It had a blue border on that one. It was a different picture than this picture. And here's a good picture again out in California, Howard driving him. He was the pride and joy of their ranch for a long time because he was a homebred stallion. They raised quite a few out of him. Then they did move on to a little different things. Keep in mind that trailer, Terry. Terry just said the infamous red trailer. Remember that, because that's going to come up here. Here's Jill in Quo Vadis. Howard leading him. Keep in mind he's a stallion in that picture, a young stallion, a colt really. So I thought this was a cool ad. This is kind of before Venmo and before PayPal and a lot of things, before a lot of people were charging stuff in the horse business. This would have been again in the early 70s. And in the ad in the magazine, They have a picture of a MasterCard with Quo Vadis next to it, saying, you know, you could put it on your master charge to breed to him. So I thought that was pretty cool, or to buy babies or whatever. So here's another, we're going to go through some high views here. This is High Views Pride. He was owned by Goldenrods, and he was high point, I believe, in the nation, and as a yearling or so. He's a 1970 colt, and there's quite a few pictures of him. Here's a good picture of him when he's a little more mature, and he sold at the 72 red carpet sale that we're going to talk about here in a minute, and he was just another one of the High Views products. A lot of the Iowa breeders, you know, traded back and forth and helped each other and bred to each other's stallions, stood each other's, you know, stuff and things like that. And the Stones were one of those, the Peets, and of course Victors. There was a lot of other Iowa families too. Since the club started in Iowa, there was a lot of breeders in Iowa. Hello, Tracy. Welcome to the show. Yes, I can see you. I can't see a lot of names. I know Becky's commenting, and I see Jackie, Terry, and Tracy. I see your names. A lot of other people are just under Facebook user, but that's okay. But just keep in mind, when you make a comment, sometimes I can't see who it is. For everybody that's just joining, thanks for joining live. This is episode 27 of my POA podcast, Black in Hand and Beyond. We're talking about the Victor family tonight, High Views Horse and Pony Farm. So here's Victor's Miss High Heels, and this is Howard Jr., one of Howard's sons. This is an early picture. This is one of the early products in the 60s. A lot of color. The Victors had a lot of loud colored POAs. And here's Chief Pokey again. Now here's a gelding that went on to do a lot of things. High Views Ben-Hur. One thing about the Victors, they took Reserve Grand with all three. There's been a High Views Reserve Grand Stallion, Mare, and Gelding. And this gelding was Reserve Grand at the International Show twice, in 73 and in 74. And he was a pretty good built POA. There's a picture of him where Howard's shown him. I might have it in here. I don't see it right now. But where Howard's got those white boots on, somebody was talking about. So here is Becky with High Views Ms. Coco Kelly, and it says they're Reserve Grand in 73, and this was taken out in Colorado at the 75 International. And the Victor family kept this mare for a long time. They raised babies out of her for a long time. Of course, she was a home-raised mare. There he's out of place, but there's a picture of Ben-Hur and Howard. And there he is with the white boots. Sorry for the little polka dots that got on the catalog or magazine. That happened before I got the magazine. But there he was, Reserve Grand, and that's at the Missouri International in 1974. He was a Reserve Grand gelding. High Views Ben-Hur and Howard Victor. So here's a cover story about High Views Little Poke. Now High Views Little Poke was, or they called her, is a daughter of Pokey, and then of course she was by Siri Chief. So the Victors didn't have a lot of Siri Chief stuff, but they bred Pokey, their first POA, to him, and got this thing this filly right here, which she didn't get up very big. She didn't grow up very big, but she was a pretty cool POA. Again, another buckskin like her mother. And this basically would be second generation, first bred by them, but you know, they raised her mother. That was their first POA ever, was this filly's mother. So that's pretty cool there. And there's Danny again with Little Poke. And then the Hammers ended up with Danny. Butch Hammer liked the shorter POAs. Of course, they had great POAs. The Hammers, they showed a lot of halter POAs. And here is Butch Hammer holding High View's Little Poke. She won the world in costume and in halter as a small mare. And there's a picture at the International. It was a 74 and 75 High Point 50 and under mare owned by Butch Hammer from Iowa. Of course, that's a costume photo. just another good little POA and part of their program in the 60s. So here's another high views. This is one I was talking to Becky about. Some of these I can't remember their names, or I've went through so many pictures the last week that I might know their names, but I got them all scrambled. So if Becky's still watching, she can help us out here. I know there's a little lag, but this was taken at the sale, I think in 1970, right in the sale ring there. Howard holding that one. And then this was in 72. This is one of the high views. I got quite a few pictures of this one. Now, keep in mind the victors over the years raised hundreds of POAs, hundreds of them. I mean, some of them never got registered. Some went on to do good things and weren't registered. They might have just went on in Pony Club or different things. And of course, a majority of them were registered and did do their share of winning. The victors are still ranked in the top 10 to this day for number of wins at the national show and Congress. I believe they're ranked, I think, 8th currently. So for a program that hasn't raised POAs in a while, that's fairly impressive. We're just going to go through some of these. Yeah, they had a buttons and they had a high heels, and you know, they had a lot of them that some of them ain't going to have the names with the pictures here, but this is Danny Victor. So I like them when they're labeled. So this is High Views Moon Lady, and she was consigned to the sale. Kind of a good build for early. Look at that registration number, 10,552. Got a nice headset there. Nice top line, loud colored. That's kind of a winter, you know, little fuzzy photo probably in the spring. And there she is after she became a Supreme Champion. High Views Moon Lady as a Supreme Champion. So that's fun to see. Tracy just said my idol was Moon Lady. That's pretty cool. So Tracy has some experience with High Views. Here's a High Views Gee Whiz, 13,236. Here's Amoco, which Howard ran a gas station, so that makes sense. Had Amoco. Here's a nice looking baby, High Views Stuff. Another Oichi Chief baby, but the mother was a registered POA in this case. This is a 74 filly. Again, loud colored, you know, kind of like her half brother, like Quo Vadis. Here's Becky with High Views Miss Coco Kelly, and they were on the cover. I think that was in, I won't say the year. Becky probably wouldn't want me to say the year. It was 73. Anyway, they're in 77 at Shelbyville at the World Show. It's Coco Kelly again. It's a Hamilton photo with Becky. And here was wishing her good luck in 76. That picture was taken in 75. And this team did a lot. They won a lot of things. She was a Supreme Champion. Of course, you see there Becky was the 76 Iowa POA Queen. Here's another High Views Rusty. If I put all the High Views that was ever advertised in the magazine, we'd be here till tomorrow morning, so I didn't do that. But this picture's blurry, but we'll see a little better picture of her right in a minute. But this is High View's sister, and she was a sister to Quo Vadis. She topped the sale in 1971. She broke the weanling filly record. Kind of cool in this picture, you see Bud Campbell back there in the sweater with the horseshoe. He was a good friend of Howard Victor's. He didn't buy this filly, he was the contending bidder, and I thought that was pretty cool that the contending bidder was in the picture. It says here Ray Franken was the purchaser of this filly, and here's a way better snapshot. And you see that's George Lalonde with his back to the camera updating the board that I helped bring back in the 90s to the POA sale. It had been gone for quite a while. And the high selling board, I was always proud of that. sitting back there behind the block, and it shows all the records. And he's updating it right there, you can see Highview Sis, and then it's blocked by the pedigree reader or the auctioneer there. But that's a cool picture. She sold for, I think, 2,000 and some change, like 2,075 or 2,025. But at the time, that was the high selling filly. And there is Howard. They used to give trophies for the high sellers, and the board's updated now behind him. You can see it, who the purchaser was and the seller and the year and how much. It looks like 2,075. So they were joking that the trophy was so heavy they had to have Carl help him hold it. So two pretty big men there, Howard Victor and Carl Oz from Minnesota. So in 1972, I've talked about this on here before, but the three big promoters and POA breeders from Iowa, Goldenrod, which was the Stone and Morris family, Ray and Avis Peets from Spencer, Iowa, and the Victors all got together and had their own sale. And it was just those three consigners, and it was called the Red Carpet POA sale. And I wish I got a kind of mint copy of this. This is my working copy here, but I just grabbed it. Time's always a factor. It's got a nice gold braid on here that hangs down like a bookmark, and you can see it barely on the top. It's still on there, and that made this kind of cool. And then it's got like wax paper when you open it up. But here's it was in Ankeny, Iowa, at that famous sales barn down there, and May 20th of 1972. To put that in perspective, I'm sitting here today. I was born in July of 72, so this sale took place 2 months before I was even born. So that's pretty cool. And I attached this picture too because a private production sale, and look at the pedigree readers. George Lawn, Bob Arbuckle, Harold Slagle, Ken Bateman, and Doug Murfeld, all pretty much famous people, legendary people in POAs. And then the ringmen, again, I'll just pick through some of these names, but Victor Clark, Owen Ziegler, Henry Estelle, Lynn Puffenbarger, Wayne Latch, Bobby Moser, and Max Nebergall. Now, I just want to take a break right now in this show to say my condolences to the Latch family. I just found out today, as many of us did in the POA world, that Wayne Latch passed away last night. He's a great gentleman, a lot of history in POAs. His mom and dad were in POAs. He was raised in the ponies. He was born in the early 40s, but he still grew up in the POAs. And his dad, Elroy Latch, passed away at a fairly young age, and Wayne continued on in the POAs, and his mother Helen played a big part in POAs, was the secretary treasurer, and her name was stamped on many, many papers in the early days. And we'll have an episode on the Latches down the road. Of course, they won a lot of stuff in the 70s and the 80s with their own breeding program with the Wayne Latch family program. So again, my condolences to the Latch family. So here's another page. I apologize if you hear some noise in the background. We are at the dealership here, so there's some people just got excited for buying a new Jeep or something. But this is pretty cool. Howard Victor, Ray Peets, Keystone, and Ray Morse all signed this, and this was their own sale. They didn't have another sale after this, so this was a one-off in 1972. But promotion sales like this and farm sales, you know, in the quarter horse industry and some other breeds is more prevalent. But in the POAs, you just didn't have this. You didn't have many people that did this. Later on, a few farms did something like this, but this was a pretty big deal in 1972. So here's H.W. Oichi Chief in the catalog. I know we've seen some pictures of him before, probably this picture. I just wanted to put this in because it was the reference sire. And then, of course, his son will be in here, too. And you see down there, they're listing off some of his foals: Pokey, Chief Pokey, High Heels, Quo Vadis, Miss Coco Kelly, and more. We talked about all those. We showed pictures of all those. So, you know, he made a good name for himself, Oichi Chief, mainly with the Victor's babies. And then here's his famous son, Highview's Quo Vadis. He was a reference sire in here, and there was some mares in full to him, I believe, in the sale, and there was a red leopard filly in the sale by him. So all three breeders put some in that they maybe didn't want to consign, but they wanted to really promote the sale, so they wanted some draws. So the Victors was the same way. They put in some of their big name POAs, including Pokey, and I'm not sure if they really wanted to sell Pokey or not. She did no sale at $16.50. I think they probably just put her in as a draw, and if she would have brought enough money, they might have sold her. But I attached this too because it's a good pedigree over there. You see all registered Welch on the bottom, the sire and dam of the mother, pot of gold, Lucky Charm. They were all registered. And then, of course, Oichi Chief up there registered as a POA, but both his parents were Appaloosas, as he was a hardship. So there's Pokey. So the Victor's first POA that they had born on their place was registered number 4049. So they were fairly early in POAs. I believe 64 is when she was born. I think they started getting those Welch mares in 63, so that makes sense. Jackie Guthrie says, I remember going to the spring POA sales in Ankeny with Howard and Wanda. Yep. There was quite a few sales there. So this is another one. They did sell this one at the sale, it says, for $1,000, but this was Chief's Pokey, the one they called Shishi. Another Quo Vadis, a Quo Vadis sister, another Oichi Chief daughter. And then Highview's Pride was in the sale. I think he topped it at $1,200, but he was consigned by Goldenrods. They had him as a stallion, then he was a 2-year-old stallion. They'd won High Point in the Nation with him as a yearling. And you see what I was talking about the breeders working together. His mother was a Highviews, but she was by GR's Red Copper, one of the Goldenrod stallions. And I'm just going to list some of the Highviews that were in this sale. There was a lot of horses in this sale. I forget how many, but there was probably 60 or 70 at least, and I know it was a lot of work. I think Becky said they made a lot of these catalogs, but I know Carl Stone told me that sale was a lot of work. Of course, a lot of these guys were teenagers and kids when this was put on, when the sale happened. So here's Highview's Fair Lady. You notice a lot of the same color patterns from Oichi Chief. And that was out of a registered Welsh. Here's another one out of a registered Welsh. Highview's Don Juan. And here's one out of a grade mare, an Oichi Chief daughter, and a grade mare. $750, not a bad price for $72 for a 65 mare. Okay, so now we go into a little different. We talked about Quo Vadis and we talked about Oichi Chief and all that stuff. We have a couple more chapters to go in the Highviews and Victor family story, and this is one of them. This was a small Appaloosa mare named Miss Margaret that they hard-shipped as a POA. They got her and her sister, I believe, from up in Minnesota. That's where they were bred anyway. Skipette was that mare, and she stayed Appaloosa size. And this one here stayed POA size even in the 54 limit. So I think she ended up 53 and a half or 53 and 3/4. This is her as a 2-year-old. She won her class in 1976 at the International Show. And of course, that's Howard showing her. And she was way ahead of her time. Of course, she was no pony blood. She was all horse blood. So, but she was the height of a POA in the 54-inch limit even. So. And then in 77, she did go on to win Grand at the California International. As I said before, Victor's hauled out to California both times, all the way from Iowa. Howard was a big promoter of POAs. He was on the board of directors for many years, and he just believed in promoting POAs. And this is more of a farm shot kind of her, but she was just a tremendous mare, Miss Margaret. You see she's a little older here. You see the horse forearm on her, the big bulgy forearm. And here she is with her, I think her first baby. She's a lady, and she sold at the sale a couple times as an adult, registered 22020. She was Miss Margaret's daughter in 1978, and you see there they have Miss Margaret listed at 53 and a half. So just a horse that didn't grow, and she became a grand champion POA mare. So that happens once in a while. So here's another chapter. with Double Tough coming into POAs, and the breed was starting to change a lot. You know, the Victors breeding Appaloosas to pony mares like Welsh mares and stuff was starting to change a little bit, and Howard realized that, and he went to the Carl Miles dispersal sale in Idaho, and he came home with Kid Plotted. And Kid Plotted is a double-bred Prince Plotted. He's by Prince Charles, who made a name for himself. Of course, he's out of a Wieskamp mare, Show Maria. And then Prince Plotted bred a Joker's B daughter. Of course, Carl Miles had Joker B and got the mother to Kid Plotted. And Kid Plotted was fairly short, and that's why he picked him out. He brought him back to Iowa, and he ended up changing POA history for sure. He made a big impact on POAs. And as then Gold Prince came into POAs, and a lot of people tried to compete with Double Tough and Gold Prince, the Victors were sitting there in Indianola breeding the Kid Plotted ones to their mares that they'd gathered over the years, and they come up with a pretty good cross there. So this is Kid Plotted. Not many pictures exist of him that have been published. This was one of them. You can tell he's not very big. He's not very tall. He was fairly young in this photo. And here's some of the other App Stallions that the Victors added around the same time. They had Prince Dominic. This is his son, Plotted's Blair, but they also had Prince Dominic on their place for a while. And then here's Prince Twist. Well, Plotted's Bonanza by Prince Twist. So you see they went the Prince Plotted way, and these are some long neck, nice looking modern horses. This is the late 70s that they started doing this, adding some new blood. But the horse that made the big impact on the program was Kid Plotted. And here's one of his foals that unfortunately died fairly young, but this was out of one of their old show mares that Becky showed, of course, and then Kid Plotted. And they named him Impressive, but I believe he had an accident as a baby and he didn't go on. But he was good enough for him to take a full-page ad in the magazine as a little bitty baby there. So here's an ad with all three of the stallions we just looked at, two of them anyway, the two Appaloosas on the bottom. So Kid Plotted, his first crop was in 1977, and from that produced Plotted's Crusader, who ended up being the homebred Victor stallion that would really put them over the top. They already were considered one of the top programs of all time, but when he came along in 77, they took their program in another direction. And even after Howard passed away, Wanda kept breeding some mares to him and raised a lot of champions from him. And he wasn't a flashy show horse. He was kind of a stout, short-made stallion, but he was a few spot, and that helped him out. And they did some stuff they hadn't been doing as much. They started breeding them to quarter horses. The Victors had usually used ponies and Appaloosas, but they started breeding Crusader to some quarter horse mares, and that helped him out too, of course. So he was born in 77, and then his half-sister was born in 77 that would become really famous, and that's Pokey Plotted. I didn't get a picture of Pokey Plotted in here. She's in the Hall of Fame. I can put a picture online of her. There's bunches of pictures of her on the POA history group, and she topped the sale twice, became a Supreme Champion, and is in the Hall of Fame. So she was also by that first full crop of Kid Plotted. And then Latch's Shady Lady was a mare that became a good brood mare for Jackie Guthrie. Was a national champion producer. She was by that Leopard stallion, Kid Plotted. And then the next year, Crusader's brother, Kid Plotted Jr., he come out the flashy one. So he's right here. This is Kid Plotted Jr. Now, he wasn't the sire his brother Plotted's Crusader was, but he had a little more look to him, a little more horse look. But again, he was a leopard, and he just didn't have the color genetics that this few spot did. And this is a little closer up picture. This was taken from Spotted Pride, or Spots Included, the POA history book. And this is the only photograph I've ever seen of Plotted's Crusader. I know Becky looked for some. Unfortunately, they had a house fire a few years ago. Wanda did, and they lost some pictures because I know there was a photo shoot taken probably the day this picture was taken, but not many pictures exist, and this is the only one I've ever seen published of Plauditz Crusader. Now, Plauditz Crusader would go on to sire some famous babies. The first one, his first full crop, was in 1980, and this is She's a Pleasure, and she's a daughter of Miss Margaret, the mare we showed, the grand champion mare from '77. She was bred to Plauditz Crusader, and this filly won the International Futurity in 1980. That was 2 years before they had the Select Sire Futurity. There was only 1 year after when this one won, and then they judged the colt and the filly winners against each other, and the winner of that would, the overall winner, would get the Star Hill Award, and that was She's a Pleasure. And of course, that's Howard Victor in his white boots there in 1980, winning the Star Hill Futurity Award, and then of course she was the filly winner. So she was Crusader's first champion, and then he went on to the 1982, he sired Burnt Sugar, and he won the international show out in Colorado, and he went reserve grand as a baby, the only second baby to do that. Avatar did it in '79, and Burnt Sugar did it in '82. They're the only two ever to do that. Of course, Awesome All Night won grand a few years ago at the International as a baby, but in '82 that was a huge thing for a weanling colt to go reserve grand. And then Ruth Pecoy's Dual Plaudit was a Plauditz Crusader foal. He won in '84, and of course he went on to have a good career with Miss Sharon Beck and also the Warrens, you know, with her and Bob Warren, and then she used him out there, Dual Plaudit. And then in 1991, Classic Crusader, I'm not reading this or anything, so if I do some ums and some ahs, it's all coming from memory. But Howard had passed away in 1990, right after the international show in August of '90. And in '91, it was very emotional. The Victors, Wanda had a couple babies there. Olin Ziegler had a Loud Leopard baby he'd got from her. He still had the mother with her, and he showed it. I think he was third, and Butch Hammer showed Classic Crusader a few spot, and he won the class. He ended up getting purchased by Jerry King and went out to Colorado and was a stallion for a while. We got some vacuum cleaner noise in the background. I'm so sorry. So anyway, Crusader made his mark at first as a baby sire, but then he ended up siring a lot of famous POAs like Plauditz Rocky Sox and Bobby Sox Plaudit. We're going to see some pictures of him. So here is somebody that watches the show all the time, and she just made some comments. I've been too busy talking to look at her comments. Dual Plaudits in the pedigree will keep the size down. That's true. And they're usually pretty good colored too, and pretty stout. If you want to show in compete and halter, it doesn't hurt to have Dual Plaudit in the background. So speaking of Tracy, here she is on High Views Fawn, one of the little POAs Victor's raised. And here is a good picture of Katie up on High Views Fawn, and that's Tracy holding her. I love this picture, so I'm glad I could get it in here tonight. This is High Views Fawn. Best pony to ever look through a bridle. You've said that many times, so it must be true. So, and she was a true POA, you know what I mean? Look at this picture here, a short, loud colored POA. She was a true pony, pony of America, you know, true POA. And then here's one last picture. Katie's got a silver cup there. Good picture. I know Tracy told Katie to watch tonight, so hopefully she did. That's why she told her 51 inches, yeah. And then Jackie had commented earlier, Classic Crusader and his dam also won mare and foal that year, yep. I think that was GR's Susie Grand or something like that was her name, was the mother. So here's another person that watches a lot, and he grew up in the Iowa area near the Victors, and that's Terry Thorson. Hopefully he's watching tonight. Yeah, I did see his name. I know he is. And this is him and his little brothers up on this horse. This is the horse they got from the Victors, and he told me that the Victors had purchased this mare, and they kept the colt, and then they sold this mare to Terry's family, and that's him at the halter there. And like I say, he got a lot of POA experience as a kid from hanging around the Victors and stuff. And now Terry's raising POAs, in Iowa. He had some really good fillies this last year, yearling fillies that were showing out there in the circuit. So another person that showed with the Victors as a teenager was Kay Schwenk. And of course, Kay went on to have a great POA career, raised her kids in POAs, and raised some good driving POAs and shorter POAs. Here's another high seller from the Victors. So they ended up 4 times the high seller at the national sale was a Victor bred POA. And one time it was the same mare, Pokey Plotted. But in 1980, it was Highview's Toby was the high seller. And here's a picture of him. Again, he's a leopard. You can't see much of him, but he looks like the typical Victor colored POA from that era. So here's Howard receiving an award from B.B. Arbuckle. If you don't know who the Arbuckles were, I know a lot of the older timers will. They're from Kansas. I believe they're the breeders of Shoto. And they had a lot of great POAs. The Arbuckles did. And she's handing Howard. I just like this picture. That's why I included it. Good picture there at one of the POA banquets. Here's kind of a fun picture. I don't know if this was a roast. I know they roasted Howard one year at a banquet. And here he's holding a toilet seat. So I wish I could have been there for that. That was before my time in POA. But again, another cool picture. It's not always serious about all the trophies and stuff. These people create memories and families, friends and families from all over the country, lifelong memories. So here's something, I don't want to get into politics or anything too much, but Howard used to wear this pin around because he was a believer of the 46 to 54 inch POAs. His family got in it in the early 60s, so he didn't, even though he put a lot of horse blood, they believed in the 54 inch limit. So here Terry's the red trailer and red truck. I believe that's what color they are. And this was an ad. The Victors had a lot of unusual but cool ads. Sometimes they wouldn't even show a horse. Like here it kind of looks like a hotel marquee. Howard Jr., Becky, Dan, and Jill, and then Howard and Wanda and their address, and then their truck and trailer on the bottom. So that's a cool ad. That would have been in the 70s. Then here's an ad that kind of highlighted a lot of their good POAs, and we've talked about all the POAs in this picture. And I showed a color shot of the farm there in the beginning. Now here's another unusual ad. Some stick figures on the bottom, but if you look really close, that's an old style desk there with the pop-up and the ashtray. But that's a picture of a man in a suit or a businessman. I don't know if that's Howard pictured there, but they've imposed the picture of Quo Vadis as the head. And pretty cool ad, and it says Merry Christmas from Quo Vadis and Company. And this is way before like Bojack and things like that. So pretty cool marketing there. And then the family, Howard, Wanda, Howard Jr., Becky, Dan, and Jill, all in stick figure. And then they got polka dots on the girls' skirts. That would have been in a December magazine. Tracy, what are you asking was in 85. So here's another ad, Highview Horse and Pony Farm. This is that big barn that we showed before, the indoor arena and the big barn. And featuring Ochi Chief and Kid Plotted bloodlines. They used sons of both of those, homebred sons. Quo Vadis was Ochi Chief's son, and then when they moved on from him, they went to Kid Plotted, and then of course Plotted's Crusader became the foundation, really, the modern day foundation of the program, all through the 80s and the 90s. Yeah, I'm sure that was from 85. the buttons, because that's the year it was voted on. So it was 84, 85, because it changed in 86 for shows. Officially they say 85, but the first year for shows was 86. So here's a cool Christmas ad with Christmas coming up. Believe it or not, we just had our Christmas lights hung up yesterday, so it's December 1st, it's tomorrow. So Merry Christmas from the Victors and Kid Plotted. That they, like I say, they had a lot of ads that you never even seen a horse, which was kind of funny for a farm that had 100 horses on their place, but they just had creative ways to advertise. So here's two of the Victor's products that really became famous, one from the 80s and I think one from the 90s or late 80s, but Crusaders Prince and Bobby Sock Plotted, of course, both promoted by the Shingletons. That's Mitch with Crusaders Prince and Shailene with Bobby Sock Plotted. Both of these became well-known POAs. Bobby Sox is in the Hall of Fame, and this is pretty cool here, first and second in the nation in 2001. So that's a nice ad there, and there's the original photo. Two nice POAs. Of course, Bobby Sox Plotted is recognizable as any POA gelding. I mean, he won a lot of, a truckload of awards over the years. And there they are again, the siblings in 2001. Shingleton siblings. Of course, the horses are too. They're both by Plotted's Crusader. Thank you, Charlene, for sending me all these pictures. She sent me a bunch of them to go through. Of course, I couldn't use all of them, but I used quite a few. This is a great picture here of Shailene. Of course, you do it all in POAs. Indian costume. There's his Supreme Championship, Bobby Sox. And here's his Hall of Fame award. And then they had such good luck with Victor's bred ponies that they went on to another one, Plottett's Rusty. Now, he's another chapter in the Victor program. Wanda used the stallion named Tease Texas Ferrari. He was a quarter horse, and she bred him to, she had a lot of few spots and color producing mares by Crusader and some of the sons of Crusader and stuff. And after Crusader started getting older and passed away, she used this quarter horse stallion. He did a great job. This is one of his good foals, and a lot of the Plottets at the end that they had T in their name, just like this one, Plottett's Rusty, and they came from that quarter horse stallion. So we all remember Becky. She's watching tonight. I said Vicky because Becky Victor Baker. Of course, she married Steve Baker, and they had two beautiful girls, and Dana and Darcy. But this was Becky as a teenager, and there she is when she was the Iowa Western Pleasure winner, and she was the POA queen for Iowa. Well, here she is when she came back after she got married, and her mom still had some mares, quite a few mares, not as many as Howard and Wanda had at one time, but she was still raising quite a few foals. But she didn't have much for broke POAs, so they used Crusaders Prince that the Shingletons ended up getting. They used him for a while, and this is Highview's Secret. She's, I believe, the last daughter by Highview's Miss Coco Kelly that Becky had shown. And they used her in lead line for the two girls. And then, till they could get some homebreds trained, here she is with her Secret with a baby. Of course, if you're a mare on the Victor's place, you're going to have babies. But one of the POAs they went and got was Kate Cherie, and they got her from the Carl Laws family. She came from Wally Cates, was the breeder of her, and of course she was a Series Silver Prince pony. She was a short little POA, and both girls, Dana and Darcy, both rode her early on. And then towards the end of their careers, they ended up riding Plottett's POAs. This is Plottett's Libby of T. She became a Supreme Champion. Of course, she's Crusader on the bottom, and T's Texas Ferrari is the sire. And that is Dana. And then this is Darcy. This is the last one Darcy rode, and that's Plotted Spice Tea. I believe she was ROM and halter. So kind of came full circle there. You know, Becky got back in POAs, and you seen Wanda at a lot of the shows with her granddaughters and stuff. Of course, she kept the herd going, and of course Becky helped and the kids and everything. So that's how we get all the way from 1964 on into the 2000s. So a lot of history there and a lot of different chapters. Here's a cool picture, I believe, at one of the early conventions, and that's Howard with his hands to his head there. I think he probably got a gag gift or some kind of gift. It looks like glasses with lights on it, and that's Wanda laughing and clapping there on the left, and then that's Keith Stone and Bonnie Stone. Of course, they were big time promoters, and Keith was one of the first inductees into the Hall of Fame, and then so was Howard. I believe Keith went in 90 with Les Boomhauer, and I think Howard went in with Lynn Puffenberger in 91. And then also sitting at that table on the left is Jackie Guthrie, young Jackie there. And then I think in the background there you see on the very left, I believe that's Doc Nemers sitting at a table turned, watching what's going on at this table. So everybody's kind of looking at this table. So this would have been around 89 or 90 when this picture was taken. And here's a picture of Wanda receiving her Hall of Fame plaque. So her husband went in a few years before she did, and then she went in 93 or 94. I didn't look it up for this episode. It might have been 93. They were one of the first couples to go in. There's been several couples now, and they didn't go in together, you know, but they went in. They both went into the Hall of Fame and delivered rightfully so. They both deserve in there. They raised their kids in POAs, raised a lot of great POAs, and after all this time, I believe Wanda passed away in 2015, and she hadn't raised POAs in a while then, in a few years, and she still, her and her family is ranked in the top 10 for national champions. So that's a great accomplishment. So I believe I got everything in that I wanted. I know I don't have pictures of certain horses like Burnt Sugar and Pokey Plotted, but you can see those on the thing. Rocky Sox Plotted was a famous POA. I didn't get a picture of him. He won a lot of championships, and I'll show some pictures of him on the website. But again, they're just, you know, when you talk about these big POA farms and the families, you kind of just scratch the surface. This is meant to be an overview and not an encyclopedia of the whole thing. So hopefully I did this family justice. I want to thank Becky for helping me out and turning over pictures. Pictures, guys, is the big thing. I'm doing some episodes coming up on some things, and I've asked a lot of people for pictures, and about half of them have responded, and that's great. Some may respond yet. But anyway, that's what makes this go around. If I just did a podcast where I was talking, then, you know, the pictures wouldn't be that big apart. But I think it's way cooler to have pictures with the podcast. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode 27, High Views Horse and Pony Farm and the Howard and Wanda Victor family. Again, Friday, remember, mark your calendars, just a couple days from today, we're going to have a special episode right here in Studio J in Enid, Oklahoma at Jackson's Auto Family. That episode's going to be sponsored by Jackson's. All of them pretty much are, because I'm sitting in their building using their equipment here in a beautiful studio that basically is just used for POA. Shane is really happy with everything that I'm doing for POA. He knows I don't get paid for this or anything, so he's happy to lend equipment, a really nice computer and cameras and a light setup here to help do this, and he thinks this is wonderful. We're not doing a podcast right now for the dealership, so just not enough hours in the day basically to do that. So, but anyway, Friday we're going to have Jan Jones Nolan and her husband Brian are going to come over and spend the day in Enid. And they're going to be our guests at 6:30-ish, like I always say, Central Standard Time, p.m., Friday night. So that'll be cool. And they're going to be in studio live that night, both of them. So It just won't be my mug on the camera. We'll have Jan and Brian, and then of course we're going to have a lot of pictures. And Art and Rocky Jones have bred a lot of great Caddos POAs, and Jan's still breeding them over there in Oklahoma. So we're going to have a lot to talk about. And then December 14th is going to be episode 29 of my POA podcast, Black Hand and Beyond. And it's about all the mares that have won multiple titles at the national show, grand champion titles. There's been 9 of them that have done it. 7 of them have done it twice, and 2 of them have done it 3 times. And no mares won 4. And of course, all the other mares only won once. So it's kind of like the Triple Crown. You know, there'll be a few mares do it almost back to back, and then there'll be a 15-20 year period where a mare didn't win grand twice, and then all of a sudden one will do it. So we're going to talk about that history on December 14th. That's a Tuesday night, same time. And then our last episode of the year before we get into the holidays and Christmas will be December 21st, and this is a very special edition. Remember, this is called Black Hand and Beyond because it's just not all history. Sometimes we talk about modern things, and December 21st show is going to be about the current stallions that are available in 2022. A few of them that'll be on there will be because they're advertising for their foals. Some of them are not standing at the public, but they're still available in programs, and their foals are available. But most of them are going to be actually standing, either live cover or ship semen. So that's a sponsored show as well. Each stallion owner is sponsoring. So if you want to get on board, I have a few slots left, but it's filling up. I have a lot of people have already contacted me and are on board for that episode. But if you have a stallion you want to promote that's going to be pretty cool, you can have up to 10 pictures of your stallion and offspring. And of course, I'll talk for like 5 minutes or so. We're probably going to have close to 20 stallions. So to do justice to everybody, you know, if we do an hour and a half, 2-hour show, everybody will get a fair shake. I'll probably even time it that night since that is a sponsored show. So that's all I have for tonight. I want to thank everybody that did contribute tonight. And like I say, that'll be the last episode of the year. Then next year we'll go into some other stuff. I may start a podcast eventually about some horse history, but we'll see. It's just a lot of time putting these together. Of course, this is a labor of love, anything to do with POAs. So again, join us Friday. Remember, special episode Friday. You can watch it anytime, just like this one will now be on the POA History Group anytime. But it is cool to tune in live. And again, thanks everyone. We have 426. It's going up hearts. So thank you everyone for watching. Have a good week, everyone. See you Friday night right here at Studio J.